folks, my name is Jen, and today I would like to talk to you about my best and favorite reads from 2022. So, normally when I do like my best reads, I have like my honorable mentions section, and normally honorable mentions go to like books that almost made it onto the top list, but I didn't quite count them because they were technically rereads. This year I have a couple of rereads that are actually on my top list because they were honestly some of the best things that I read this year. And overall I had kind of a meh kind of year. I had these books I'm going to talk about which made me really happy, and then I had a handful of arguably bad reads, and then everything else was just Wasn't anything that I was particularly excited about, although there were some that were disappointing. There were some that, well, most actually, that they were good, but not anything that I really felt or still feel particularly enthusiastic or excited about overall. I don't honestly know if that is more a reflection on what I read or my own mental and emotional state this past year. I'm not 100% sure, but I do have 9 books which were my favorite books of the year, and then a couple of honorable mentions. So let's get into the honorable mentions first. So first up for honorable mentions is, of course, The Shining by Stephen King. Now, this is one of my favorite books of all time, and I tend to read it every like October or November. The reason why I have it on my honorable mentions like top list this year is because I annotated it this fall, and I feel like doing this helped me get so much more out of this book, not only from the literary perspective, I guess, of understanding more about the characters and picking up on a lot more of foreshadowing and whatnot that happened in here, but also from a writing standpoint as well. I could really see the little details and the little weaving that Stephen King did here in the book, and it was great. So yeah, annotating this book was a great experience, and I definitely plan on annotating all of my top favorite books in the future because I think that I will get so much more out of each of them. They will be even more enjoyable. And the other honorable mentions I have are 2 manga classics adaptations, Pride and Prejudice and The Count of Monte Cristo. The Pride and Prejudice manga adaptation is by Stacey King and the art is by Posey, and it's been a few years since I have read Pride and Prejudice, so if there is any information that's missing from here, I didn't pick up on it because it has been several years since I've read it. So if there was anything missing, I don't know, but it didn't feel like anything was. I also really loved that 2 things. First of all, I think everyone looks pretty great overall, all of the characters. I really loved that we get some kissy romantic scenes, which, you know, are sometimes lacking in adaptations because, I mean, it's a period piece, so I enjoyed that was in here as a fan, and I also thought that the humor was wonderful in here. The art style is great, and there's like a couple of humorous bits that kind of lean more towards anime and manga kind of physical humor, and as someone who loves reading manga and watching anime, that was also like tidbits that I really liked about this adaptation. The Count of Monte Cristo was, again, really good. I love, first of all, the color piece that's in here. Oh, actually, I'll show you the color piece that's in the front of Pride and Prejudice, two of the sisters. But I really loved the art style that was in here. This adaptation is by Crystal S. Chan, and the art is by Nakman Poon, and I think that they did an amazing job because they really, I think, captured the character's essence very well. And I also really loved how they handled this story because it is a chunky story. There is a lot that happens in here. So even though there were some details that were left out and just had to be kind of left out because it would be ridiculous otherwise, to take a book that's over 1,200 pages and manage to adapt it into something that is so faithful to this story and but presents it in such a beautiful way, it was just really great. Okay, now let's get into the top books themselves. Coming in at number 9 is Daughter of the Deep by Rick Riordan. So this is following Anna Dakar, and her brother a couple of years ago were orphaned, and they now call their school Harding Pencroft Academy basically their home and their family. Unfortunately, when Anna and her freshman class is like basically the end of the year and they're heading off to do end of the year like maneuvers and like this test basically, unfortunately tragedy strikes while they are out and it changes their world entirely. So this book is dealing heavily with the lore from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and also somewhat the Mysterious Island. I have not read The Mysterious Island, but I have read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, and it's actually one of the books that I read this year. So I had kind of an understanding of what was going on. This is like almost a sequel in a sense to that because it is dealing with Anne's like descendants of people who were involved in those stories. And overall, I thought that this was just a really good take on that world. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, parts of it were enjoyable, and then the rest of it was kind of a slog for me just because it was a lot of scientific classification, which is honestly not something that I'm super into. And as far as like sci-fi goes, like I don't mind having things explained to me. In fact, most of the time I need things explained to me, but the way it was handled in that story, it ended up being more boring in here because this is like for kids. Any scientific processes or things like that were explained like at a level that someone dumb like me can like comprehend and be like, oh, that's actually really cool. I really enjoyed the characters in here, the world building, and I have to say, like, the Nautilus made this book for me. Like, the Nautilus itself, like, I would watch a show just about the Nautilus and adventures involving it, because I mean I was enjoying this book very much, and then the Nautilus appeared and it took it to top read of the year for me because I just love that damn ship. Coming in at number 8 is the Amulet series by Kazu Kibuishi. These are 8 graphic novels. The 9th and final graphic novel is, I don't know when it's coming out. I thought it was supposed to have come out last year. I checked to see if the date's been updated to this year. Nobody said anything. Nobody knows what's going on. I really hope this series has a conclusion at some point because I believe that he has been working on this for a few years at this point, and I'm like, man, I want some conclusion because there is a bit of a cliffhanger. This series is following 2 siblings, Emily and Naveen, and their mother. A year ago, Emily and Naveen's father passed away, and so they are moving with their mother to their ancestral home from her side of the family to try to start a new life, basically. On their first night there, a really mysterious and creepy creature appears and ends up abducting their mother and disappearing into an entirely other world, and Emily and Naveen follow to try to save their mother's life, and yeah, find themselves in this completely crazy other world that kind of sees them over the course of the series involved in trying to set things right in the world overall and stop bad things from happening, basically. I really enjoyed this series. I think it is, first of all, very heartwarming. There's a lot of heart in it. There's some pretty, overall stunning artwork that is in here. I really like how character emotions are captured in here as well. I think that's very well done. I enjoy a lot of the character growth that happens here with them as well, and I really like the, not only Emily and Naveen, but also the characters that are existing in this other world that they get to be friends with as well. I think it's really cool. I was just fully invested in this series overall, even when there were a couple of spots where it kind of felt like things got a little bit vague plot-wise. It was still such a page-turner because I just had to know what was going to happen next, where were the characters going with this, what was going to happen, and I just really wanted to see more of this gorgeous artwork. So yeah, I really enjoyed this series, and I think it is definitely worth a read. Then coming in at number 7 are more graphic novels, actually. Those are the Adventure Zone graphic novels that I read this year. That is Here There Be Gerblins and Murder on the Rockport Limited. So these are graphic novels by Clint, Justin Travis, and Griffin McElroy. The art is by Carrie Peisch. These are graphic novelizations of episodes from the Adventure Zone podcast, in which Griffin is the DM and he runs the campaign for his father Clint and his brothers Justin and Travis. There's shenanigans all the way through. This is another one where I also really enjoyed the artwork. I think that a lot of it is just felt very colorful. There's a lot of physical gags that we kind of hear about in like the podcast itself, but then you can actually see it in here, and a lot of it is pretty funny. There's been a couple of things I think are references to like Monty Python, I think, that cracked me up as well, and this just series makes me laugh so much. I can't wait to read the others. I think there's at least 5 volumes out right now, but it would just amused me so much, and it was great to reread this and experience this again. And this one takes place, there's like a murder mystery on a train, which is always a plus for me. So yeah, I just really enjoy these, and they brought me a lot of joy this year. Coming in at number 6 is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. So I don't think I need to tell you what Treasure Island is about, because I'm sure that if you haven't read it, you've probably watched Muppet Treasure Island or Treasure Planet, or maybe one of the old versions of Treasure Island that there was. I think there was like an old Disney live action one at some point in like the 60s or whatever. But this brought me so much joy reading this summer. I used to be really into pirates when I was younger. I watched Treasure Planet and was really into that as a kid, and I really enjoyed Treasure Island. I read this, and then Pirates of the Caribbean came out, and yeah, I was all about pirates for a long while there, and I haven't really had anything to do with them in several years now, so picking this up was just an absolute delight and reminded me again why I was always so fascinated with pirates, both reading about like their exploits and also kind of slightly afraid of them because like they could be pretty bloodthirsty depending on the crew. But this was just such an enjoyable read. It could be a little bit challenging as far as like the dialogue is concerned. It is written how pirates or seafaring people would have talked at the time. I believe I remember reading that Robert Louis Stevenson would like hang out down by the docks and stuff like that so he could pick up on how people were talking so he could better like transcribe that into his book. And I think it's very well done, but it can be a little bit hard to decipher at times. That's why it's nice to have like a version like this that has like footnotes on the side, so it's like you can get like, oh, that's what they're trying to say, or understand what some of like the nautical terms are if you are not like involved or know anything about like nautical stuff. Despite like the at times challenging dialogue and also a couple of lulls in the action, this is still such a page turner. It is a full-blown like swashbuckling adventure, and I even felt like I got a little bit more out of it reading it now as an adult as opposed to when I read this when I was younger. And yeah, I really enjoyed this, and this was a lot of fun, and I think this is probably one of the more accessible classics I think that exist out there. If someone was like wanting to get into classics, I think this is one of them that is one that's easy to ease into it because of how action-packed it is. Book number 5 was another reread, Witch by Eva Ibbotson. So this is a story that is following Belladonna, who is like the nicest little good witch ever who wishes to be a bad witch because she desperately wants to win the heart of the most evil wizard that has ever existed, Aramon the Awful. So Belladonna finds herself in a contest with other local witches, all of them quite terrible, to try to, you know, win his hand in marriage, basically. This was so incredibly cute. I had forgotten how delightful this book was. Like, this was a childhood read of mine a long time ago, and picking it up this past October was just wonderful. I figured it would be kind of a palate cleanser in between like spooky books, and it definitely was. It is so cute. The humor in here is just fantastically dry and witty, and it has that like, I don't know how to explain it other than just calling it that particular British sense of humor. It's like there's a very specific way that British authors write for children that when it's humorous, and it's rampant in here, which I think is part of why it was so enjoyable. It's really heartwarming and cute. There's like a found family element to it, which is something that I always particularly love. And yeah, I absolutely adored this book so much. And I honestly think that, you know, I know this is supposed to be like middle grade, but I think anyone of any age could read and enjoy this book. Okay, so book number 4 is An Extraordinary Union by Alyssa Cole. So this is a historical fiction romance, and this is following two characters who are both undercover in the Confederate South during the Civil War. Following first and foremost Elle, who is a former slave who was able to come to freedom with her parents when she was a kid, and she has an eidetic memory, and she has been sent to the South to go undercover in a plantation, and finds herself bumping into Malcolm, who is a detective for the Pinkerton Agency, who is also currently undercover. But as he is a white man, he is undercover as a Confederate soldier. They're both trying to get close to this like plantation family and their friends who are potentially involved in a plot using a weapon that could basically make the war turn in the Confederacy's favor. So they're basically trying to find out what this thing is and stop it so they can hopefully, you know, stop the war entirely, but also maybe give the Union Army a heads up on what's going on. This was beautiful. I mean, first of all, Alyssa Cole is a wonderful writer, and with her romances, she just writes them so well. Her characters are like totally three-dimensional. Like, they are flawed human beings, and when they come together, it's not like, you know, the standard where they are trying to fix each other or anything like that. It's more like these are flawed human beings who know how to try to make their lives better, and they're both just coming together and supporting each other in these ways of making their lives better and changing things and fixing themselves, basically. And I find that really delightful. I also really loved the characters themselves. I found both of them to be really fascinating characters. I was really invested in their story and in their romance. Malcolm has a Scottish accent, which is an extra thing that I always enjoy because I'm me. And you could really, really tell how much research that Alyssa Cole did, how much went into writing this novel. Sometimes with historical fiction or historical romance, it can almost feel like someone's really trying to shove it down your throat that they really did their research. But in this, everything, like the smallest details, it just felt completely natural. Like I'm just reading almost like a period piece, if it were not for, you know, the spicy bits that exist in here. But yeah, I really enjoyed this, and this was, I think this might have been like my first 5-star read of the year, I think, was this book. It just was, like I said, so enjoyable, so sweet and heartwarming, and also tackled like a pretty difficult part of history and handled it, I think, very well. So, my like number 3 favorite book this year was The Foundling and Other Tales by Lloyd Alexander. These are technically part of the Chronicles of Prydain series by Lloyd Alexander. They're almost like, I guess you could say, prequels in a sense. They basically take place before the events of the Chronicles of Prydain, those like 5 books in the series. This is a way of fleshing out the world of Prydain itself. We see some characters that we will see in the Chronicles themselves. We see their beginnings. We see some lore that basically expands the world and also gives some context for events and things that happened in the Chronicles themselves. And I just really loved this. This brought me so much joy when I read this earlier this year. It was incredibly heartwarming. It made me kind of emotional, and I just really love the way that Lloyd Alexander created this world and the love and care that he put into every part of it. Because I have done my own research into lore, and I have read a little bit about like Celtic lore and also like Welsh lore and stuff like that. You can see little bits of things that Alexander was interested in and things that he decided to like rework or slip into Prydain itself, but also like this collection, and I just also found that really enjoyable as well. So yeah, I really love this, and if you're someone who has read the Chronicles of Prydain and you haven't read this, I think you definitely should. And even if you haven't read that series, I think that you could definitely read this and see if this kind of style is something that you're into, and I found it really cute and heartwarming. Alright, number 2 is The Poisoner's Handbook by Deborah Bloom. So this is Murder and the Birth of Forensic Medicine in Jazz Age New York. So this is basically a tale of the Jazz Age in New York, most of which takes place during Prohibition. So things in New York were pretty corrupt as far as the medical examiner's office. In like, let me see, this starts in like 1918. So before that, things were pretty corrupt and ridiculous. There's a lot of not great stuff going on. And then a new chief medical examiner was instated, and his name was Charles Norris, and he was a friggin' badass. So Charles Norris is put in charge of New York's like morgues, basically, and he also appoints a toxicologist named Alexander Gettler, and these two were frickin' rock stars, incredibly smart, and so focused on trying to get justice for victims during this time period. They dealt with a lot of murder cases, like a lot of murder cases, and they also dealt with a lot of unfortunate deaths due to Prohibition. When a lot of people were either drinking anything to get drunk, oftentimes with death being the result, or people who were tricked and thought that certain things were maybe okay, and then they were lied to, and guess what? It's actually poison that you just put into your body. Or also just other cases of things that people thought were okay that were not okay, like the radium girls, which are brought up in here, and other various household things that were also, guess what, poison. This follows a bunch of poisons from arsenic to chloroform to ethyl alcohol to etc. And it was just such a fascinating read. Oftentimes with like nonfiction, it can read almost more like a textbook. This did not read like that at all. This was such a page turner. It was super exciting. It was action packed. Every chapter I was wondering, oh my god, where are we going to go now? There were so many cases brought up in here. A lot of them I had heard on like true crime podcasts before. Some of them I had never heard of at all. And I just really enjoyed this and really enjoyed learning more about Charles Norris and Alexander Gettler. They were like truly forensic science superheroes and totally badass. This was just such a fun read. I will say though that there are some descriptions of what happens to people in relation to after certain poisons have been ingested. There's a lot about the processes of getting information, which involves a lot of macerating of tissues and things, and there's also some detailed descriptions of executions. So if that's stuff that you're sensitive to, maybe skip this one, I guess. But still, even with that and my squeamish stomach, I got through this and still really enjoyed it. And it was just, yeah, it's one of the best nonfiction books I've ever read. So that leaves my top book of the year, which is probably not going to be a surprise to any of you if you've been here a little bit and heard me yammer on about this, but best book I read in 2022, in fact, I think one of the best books I've ever read in my entire life, was The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. So, this chunky bad boy, clocking in at 1,276 thick 3Cs pages, is a classic tale of revenge. This is following Edmond Dantes, who basically has it all. He has just basically been promoted in his job, which is going to bring in more money for him, not only to provide for his family that he is creating, as he is going to be marrying very soon the love of his life, but also help provide a great retirement and end of life for his father, whom he loves very much, and who has been pretty poverty-stricken recently. Everything looks like it is going to be falling into place for young Edmond, except that unfortunately he has a couple of enemies who are very jealous of him and his life. We have a character who is basically just jealous of him and jealous of how wonderful his life is going. We have someone who is jealous of his recent promotion, and they would rather be the new captain of the ship over him. And we also have someone who is jealous of his relationship with his fiancée Mercedes, because they want to marry Mercedes. They plot together to basically frame him as a traitor, and he is, due to another corruptible human in the system, thrown away into the Chateau d'If, which is this like island prison off the coast of France, and he is thrown there basically to rot until he makes a certain friend and is able to gain his escape and find a treasure. And after that point, the story really kind of takes off as he seeks vengeance against the men who ruined his entire life. Now, I don't think any of that is giant spoilers, because it does take place in the first section of the book here, and it is what is normally discussed in summaries, I think, basically. Yeah, basically, I think I said in my review of this, when I reviewed it back in like March, that like something like this many pages right here at the front is his good life, his imprisonment, slipping into despair and madness, and his escape, and then every other part of this is revenge. And dude, you gotta love over 1,000 pages of revenge. This was just so amazing, and I think that despite it being very intimidating to be this thick, and the fact that I could probably brain someone with this exact copy because of how thick and heavy this sucker is, yeah, it looks intimidating, but it isn't. Like, I put this off for a long time because of how intimidated I was by how thick it is. I should not have been. At this point, I shouldn't be intimidated by any thick books whatsoever, because this was such a freaking page turner, you guys. Like, I flew through this thing. I did think that I could read an entire weekend, which was severe hubris on my part, because, no, there's not enough hours in the day with how slow I read to be able to get through this, but I did finish it in 2 weekends. So I basically had 4.5 days of this, and it was fantastic. fantastic. I didn't want to put it down, to be honest, because it was such a fascinating read. I couldn't wait to see where things were going, what the Count was going to do next. It's very chunky because there's a lot of small details in it. There are a lot of tiny little things that happen and characters that are mentioned, and at times it can you can wonder when you're first reading this, really, like, we're doing this, like, why are we looking at this character, why is this happening, who cares about that, whatever. No, every single detail of this book matters, and that is why it is so thick, because every single detail matters, because it's all going to come full circle later. It's all part of this web that the Count has woven to catch his enemies, and oh, it's so good. So if you are a little bit scared of books that are this thick, or you're just really scared of this as a classic and it being this freaking long, you shouldn't be, because for such a long book, it is such a page turner. It is so action-packed. It can be a little bit slow within the first couple of chapters, but things just keep picking up from there, and it, like I said, it was the best book I read this year, and honestly one of the best books and most brilliantly written books that I've ever read in my entire life. I finished this and it instantly went on my top favorite books of all time list because it's just so stinking good. Oh gosh, this is a stack. Alright, so these are the top books that I read this year. Like I said in the beginning, it wasn't a reading year that overall I was super, like, excited about for the most part, but these books made me really happy in different points of the year, and a couple of them had me feeling some big old emotions, and I just really enjoyed them, and I think that they brought something very special to my life in 2022, and I highly recommend all of these heavy suckers. So yeah, this is it, guys. Top books of 2022. If you've ever read any of these, please let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know what your favorite reads of the year were. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for always watching. If you would like to subscribe, please do so, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye.